It was just after 8 on a gray Sunday morning when the call came in to campus police. A report of a possible stabbing in the freshman dorms. By the time Officer Dana Whitmore pushed open the door to room 314, the metallic tang of blood was already thick in the air. Tyler Mason was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, his back against the side of the bed. His hands rested limply in his lap, still wrapped around the handle of a kitchen knife slick with red. His shirt and jeans were soaked through, the dark stains still spreading across the fabric. His eyes, wide and glassy, didn't track her movement. He wasn't crying. He wasn't saying a word. Just a few feet away, Casey Morgan lay sprawled on the cheap dorm rug, her blonde hair fanned out in a halo that was anything but angelic. Her skin had already begun to pale beneath the brutal contrast of the wounds in her chest and neck. The faint hum of the building's radiator was the only sound, until a slow, involuntary gurgle escaped her throat, then silence. Whitmore's voice was steady when she called it in, but her pulse was racing. She'd handled drunken fights, petty theft, even a suicide attempt last semester, but nothing like this. Behind her, more officers crowded the doorway, their boots squeaking against the tile. One of them, barely 23 and new to the force, froze in place when he saw the girl's body, the color draining from his face. In the hallway, students in sweats and slippers huddled together, whispering in rapid bursts. A few were crying, others holding up their phones to record shaky video that would be online before lunch. The smell of burnt coffee from someone's communal pot drifted in, mixing grotesquely with the copper sting in the air. Tyler finally looked up, his voice so quiet Whitmore had to lean in to catch it. It was supposed to be just a weekend, he said, almost to himself. What's the worst that could happen? Later, investigators would try to piece together the hours leading up to that morning. The crowded party, the whispers, the humiliation, the fury that built like steam in a sealed pot. But in that moment, inside the 4 cinder block walls of room 314, all anyone could see was an 18-year-old boy who'd just murdered the girl he said he loved. And before the day was over, the whole campus, and soon the entire country, would know exactly why. Tyler Mason grew up in Fairview, a quiet little town where everyone knew your name and nobody locked their doors at night. The kind of place with one high school, one grocery store, and a single stoplight at the center of Main Street. His father worked as a mechanic at the same auto shop for 20 years. His mother ran a small flower business out of their garage. Money was never abundant, but the Masons valued hard work and keeping your head down. Tyler was the youngest of 3 boys, the shy one who'd rather be in his room building model airplanes than out causing trouble. In high school, Tyler was the kid who never got detention, who held doors for teachers and tutored underclassmen in math. He wasn't popular in the way athletes or class clowns were, but he was liked, the kind of good boy parents wanted their daughters to date. At home, his mother used to tease that he had an old soul. He believed in loyalty, in commitment, in the idea that when you loved someone, you stayed. Casey Morgan was nothing like that. Casey's childhood was a patchwork of moves, arguments, and start-overs. Born in Jacksonville, Florida, she was 6 when her parents divorced. After that, she bounced between her mom's string of boyfriends and her dad's sporadic appearances, moving to 3 different states before she turned 16. By the time she landed in Fairview for her senior year, she'd learned to adapt fast, read people quickly, and keep one foot out the door. She was magnetic, the girl who walked into a room and immediately became the center of gravity. Dark blonde hair that fell in messy waves, green eyes that seemed to dare you to keep up with her, a laugh that cut through any conversation. Casey knew how to flirt without trying, and she liked the attention. Her Instagram was a carefully curated gallery of beach selfies, smoky-eye close-ups, and nights out, each one earning hundreds of likes. When Tyler met her in the cafeteria the first week of senior year, it was like a slow fuse catching flame. She was standing at the vending machine, cursing under her breath because it had eaten her dollar. Tyler, without thinking twice, stepped in and paid for her soda. She flashed him a smile that was equal parts grateful and amused, like she could already tell she had him hooked. They started talking between classes, then eating lunch together. By homecoming, they were inseparable. Tyler fell hard and fast, the way only first love allows, certain that he'd found the one. Casey, for her part, seemed to enjoy his steadiness, his eagerness to please. He was safe, loyal, and unlike the hot and cold boys she'd dated before. But even in those early months, there were cracks. Casey liked parties, Tyler didn't. She craved adventure. He was content with routine. Friends noticed how often she'd flirt with other guys in front of him, testing his reactions. Tyler would laugh it off, telling himself she was just friendly. When senior year ended, they both applied to State University, Tyler for engineering, Casey for communications. They got accepted, and Tyler saw it as fate. They'd get to start this new chapter together. College life, though, was a different beast. The dorms buzzed with music and late-night energy. Every floor had its share of weekend parties, and alcohol flowed freely. Tyler threw himself into his studies, still tutoring on the side, trying to keep a 4.0. Casey, meanwhile, blossomed in the social scene. She was at every party, knew everyone's name, and became fast friends with a group of guys from Tyler's floor. There were 6 of them: Brandon, the tall, smooth-talking business major; Kyle, a muscular former high school quarterback; Ethan, the sarcastic pre-med student; Marcus, who could make anyone laugh; Trevor, the quiet artist; and Shane, a wiry, restless guy always looking for trouble. They weren't just Tyler's friends. They were his college family. He trusted them. At first, Tyler didn't see anything wrong with Casey hanging out with the group. She'd sit on the arm of Brandon's chair, leaning close to hear Kyle over the music, slap Marcus's shoulder when he made a joke. Tyler told himself it was harmless. But over time, he noticed how conversations stopped when he walked into the room, how Kyle and Ethan exchanged glances when Casey was around. Once, after a party, he overheard Brandon say something about Casey not staying boring for long. Tyler laughed it off to their faces, but the comment stayed with him. Still, when he thought about their relationship, Tyler clung to the version of Casey he'd fallen for, the girl who'd kissed him in the rain after their graduation ceremony, who'd called him at midnight just to say she missed him. He didn't want to believe she was capable of betraying him. Casey, on the other hand, had started to feel restless. The college family gave her the thrill she craved: constant attention, inside jokes, the kind of teasing that made her feel desirable. Tyler was loving, yes, but he was predictable. She wanted something unpredictable. That tension hung in the air for weeks, invisible to Tyler, but obvious to anyone paying attention. And it was in that atmosphere, a mix of loyalty, temptation, and simmering insecurity, that one weekend would take everything they thought they knew about each other and tear it apart. What neither of them could imagine was how quickly it would all collapse, or how a single night could leave blood on the floor and a permanent stain on the campus's history. State University sprawled like a small city inside the city. Brick lecture halls older than the country club downtown, a student union that smelled of burnt coffee and microwave burritos, and dorm towers that rose like concrete blocks against the skyline. For most freshmen, it was a shock to the system. Total freedom, no curfew, and the constant hum of life happening just outside your door. For Tyler Mason, it was a place where he could finally start building his future. For Casey Morgan, it was a playground. Their dorm, Jefferson Hall, had a personality of its own. The elevators rattled on the way up. The laundry room was always missing half its machines, and the hallway floors were sticky by Sunday morning. Every Friday and Saturday, music pounded through the walls, bass-heavy beats that made your chest thump even if you stayed in your room. It was the kind of place where the rules existed, mostly on paper. Tyler's room was neat enough to pass a military inspection. His desk was lined with textbooks, his bed always made, laundry folded at the foot. He split the space with a quiet computer science major who spent most weekends at his girlfriend apartment across town. Tyler liked the quiet. It gave him time to work through calculus problems and sketch designs for engineering projects. Casey's side of the dorm, 3 floors up, was another world entirely. Posters of indie bands and neon signs glowed against the walls. Makeup palettes littered her desk, and there were always at least 2 open-energy drinks on her nightstand. Her roommate, Jenna, was the kind of girl who could shotgun a beer in 7 seconds flat. Between the two of them, their room became a hub for pre-parties. At first, Tyler made an effort to join Casey in the social scene. He'd tag along to parties, hold her hand while they navigated crowded living rooms that reeked of beer and sweat. He'd smile politely at her new friends, even when they shouted over him to make her laugh. But as the semester went on, the novelty wore off for him. He started staying in, telling her he had too much homework, that he'd see her afterward. Casey didn't mind. If anything, it gave her more freedom. She'd text him photos of herself in a new dress, say she was headed out with the guys, meaning Tyler's own group of friends, Brandon, Kyle, Ethan, Marcus, Trevor, and Shane. Brandon was the ringleader, the one who always had a new party lined up and knew the bouncer at every bar within 10 miles. Kyle, with his quarterback build and square jaw, had a way of making people feel seen, especially women. Ethan was the sharp-tongued pre-med student who loved poking at people's insecurities just to see how they reacted. Marcus was the joker, never serious until he needed to be. Trevor was quiet but observant, the kind of guy who remembered every detail of a conversation. And Shane? Shane was chaos in human form. The one who'd convince you to climb the roof at 2 a.m. or steal traffic cones just for the story. They all liked Casey, more than liked. They competed for her attention in small ways. A hand on her lower back when they passed through a crowd. An inside joke whispered in her ear. A beer handed to her before she even asked. Tyler noticed, but he told himself they were just being friendly. These were his friends, after all. They'd been there for him since day one, helping him navigate the maze of campus life. The idea that they might cross a line with Casey didn't seem possible, or maybe he just didn't want to think about it. But little things started to stick in his mind. The way Kyle's eyes lingered a beat too long. How Casey's phone would light up late at night with a name Tyler recognized from his contacts. The laughter he heard when he walked into a room, only to have the conversation die mid-sentence. One Thursday afternoon, Tyler came back from class early and found Casey sitting in the common lounge with Ethan. They were bent over her phone, heads close, laughing at something on the screen. When they noticed him, Ethan straightened up too quickly, and Casey's smile faltered before she greeted him. She brushed it off, saying they'd just been talking about a new bar downtown. Tyler didn't press, but the image stayed with him. Tensions didn't explode all at once. They simmered like water in a pot left on low heat. Casey seemed to be out more nights than she was in, her Instagram filling with photos from parties Tyler hadn't attended. He'd see her in group shots with Brandon's arm draped over her shoulders, or Shane pulling her into a selfie. One night, Tyler went to grab a soda from the vending machine in the lobby and overheard Marcus talking to Trevor near the mailboxes. Marcus was laughing about something, saying, "Man, she's way too wild for him." Trevor didn't laugh. He just shrugged and said, "Not my business." They both glanced up when they saw Tyler and quickly changed the subject. When he confronted Casey about how much time she was spending with the guys, she rolled her eyes. "They're your friends, Ty. If you trust them, you should trust me." She kissed him on the cheek and changed the subject before he could push further. The truth was, Tyler did trust her, or at least he wanted to. He didn't have a frame of reference for betrayal. His parents had been married for 30 years. His brothers were loyal to their high school sweethearts. In his world, cheating was something that happened in movies, not in real life. But for Casey, the boundaries were looser. She liked Tyler, even loved him in her way, but she also liked the way she felt around the other guys, seen, wanted, exciting. They didn't ask her to slow down or stay in. They encouraged her recklessness. And in the back of her mind, she knew Tyler wouldn't leave. He was too steady, too loyal. By mid-semester, the unspoken tension was heavy enough to notice. When Tyler joined the group for lunch in the dining hall, the conversation would falter. If Casey laughed too hard at one of Shane's jokes, Tyler would go quiet. If Tyler put his arm around her in front of Kyle, she'd stiffen slightly, as if the gesture was a reminder of something she didn't want to think about. Still, neither of them walked away. Tyler clung to the hope that things would level out, that the excitement of college was just a phase Casey needed to burn through. Casey told herself she could keep balancing both worlds, the comfort of Tyler and the thrill of everyone else, without tipping the scales. Neither of them realized they were already standing on the edge. And all it would take was one party, one night, for everything to come crashing down. It was the last Saturday night before midterms, and Jefferson Hall was already shaking with bass by the time Tyler finished his shift at the campus tutoring center. He could hear the party from halfway down the block. The thud of music, the drunken shouts spilling out into the crisp October air. When he stepped inside, the smell hit him first, a thick, dizzying blend of beer, cheap vodka, sweat, and the faintest hint of weed. Casey had been talking about this party all week. "Everyone's going to be there," she'd said, her green eyes bright, twisting a strand of hair around her finger. She hadn't asked Tyler if he wanted to go. She told him, and as much as he hated the scene, he'd agreed, because saying no to Casey always felt like letting her drift further away. The dorm's common room was unrecognizable. Couches had been shoved against the walls, the coffee table replaced by a keg, surrounded by plastic cups. LED lights flickered in seizure-inducing patterns, while some remix of a pop song pounded loud enough to make conversation pointless. A game of beer pong was in full swing in the corner, the crowd cheering every time someone scored. Casey found him immediately, looping her arm through his. She was wearing a black crop top and ripped jeans, her hair loose and wild, smelling faintly of coconut and smoke. "You made it," she said, kissing him quickly on the cheek before tugging him toward the kitchen. In the cramped space, Brandon was leaning against the fridge, holding court with Kyle and Shane. They were already buzzed, grinning too wide, their voices loud enough to carry over the music. Brandon handed Casey a cup without asking what she wanted. She took it and sipped like they'd done this 100 times. Tyler stood there awkwardly, sipping his own drink, trying to keep up with whatever joke they were telling. The night blurred in a way Tyler hated. Faces too close, music too loud, conversations breaking apart and reforming with each shift in the crowd. At some point, Casey disappeared. 1 second she was at his side, the next she was gone, swallowed by the press of bodies in the hallway. Tyler assumed she'd gone to the bathroom or to talk to Jenna. He didn't worry. Not yet. Upstairs, the third-floor hallway was a different kind of chaos. The lights were dimmer, the air warmer, thick with the smell of sweat and perfume. A line of people waited for the bathroom, some laughing, others scrolling on their phones. But the door to the smaller, single-stall bathroom at the far end of the hall was closed, locked from the inside. Inside, Casey was already deep into what she'd later call her fantasy. It had started with Brandon leaning in close in the kitchen, whispering something in her ear that made her smirk. He followed her upstairs under the pretense of showing her something, and by the time the door clicked shut, they were already on each other. It was fast, reckless, and messy, and when it was over, he left without a word, flashing a grin at Kyle as they passed in the hallway. Kyle was next, then Ethan, then Marcus, then Trevor, then Shane. One by one, they came and went like some unspoken relay race. Each of them left behind traces, the rumpled shirt, the smudge of lipstick, the faint thud of the door closing. Casey didn't think about Tyler. She didn't think about what would happen if anyone found out. In those moments, she wasn't Tyler's girlfriend. She was the center of something chaotic and electric, exactly the kind of thrill she craved. Downstairs, Tyler was still in the kitchen, chatting distractedly with Ethan about midterms, not realizing Ethan had already been upstairs. Every so often, Tyler would glance toward the hallway, wondering where Casey had gone, but the crowd made it impossible to keep track. It wasn't until an hour later that she reappeared. Her hair was a little messy, her top slightly askew, but she looked energized, cheeks flushed from more than just the alcohol. She slid back into the circle, wrapping an arm around Tyler's waist like nothing had happened. "Miss me?" she asked, grinning. Tyler smiled back, though something about her felt off. He pushed the thought aside. He was just tired, maybe a little drunk. No reason to overthink. Around midnight, they decided to head back to her room. The party was still going strong as they slipped out, the cold air outside a sharp contrast to the heat inside. Casey was humming some song under her breath, swinging their joined hands like a kid. Tyler tried to match her mood, telling himself the night had been fine. But somewhere on the third floor, A phone was already buzzing with a new notification. A message sent to a private group chat. A video file, low quality, shot from the corner of a cramped bathroom. In it, Casey laughed into the camera, one hand pressed against the chest of someone who was very much not her boyfriend. The caption was short and cruel. Guess she's not bored anymore. The video spread faster than a rumor ever could. By the time Tyler and Casey reached her room, half the guys on their floor had seen it. By morning, the entire dorm would. For now, though, Tyler had no idea. He climbed into bed next to her, kissed her shoulder, and closed his eyes, unaware that the worst night of his life had already begun. The sunlight in Jefferson Hall was unforgiving. It streamed through the thin blinds in Casey's room like a spotlight, cutting across the tangled sheets and the faint smell of alcohol that still clung to the air. Tyler woke up first, his head heavy but clear enough to remember he'd kept it light the night before. Casey was still asleep, sprawled across the bed with one arm dangling over the edge, her phone resting loosely in her hand. He reached for his own phone on the nightstand, intending to check the time before heading back to his room. That's when he saw it, the unread email sitting at the top of his inbox. No subject line, no sender name he recognized, just a small paperclip icon, signaling an attachment. He clicked. The video was shaky, the lighting bad, but the setting was unmistakable, the cramped single-stall bathroom on the third floor. And there, front and center, was Casey. She was laughing, her hair a little wild, her voice slurred but playful. Her hands were on someone's shoulders, a man's, but not his. Tyler's stomach clenched as the camera shifted just enough to reveal the face, Brandon. He stopped the video, his chest tightening, but his thumb moved almost involuntarily to the next file. This one was clearer. A different guy this time, Kyle. Then another. Ethan. Marcus. Trevor. Shane. By the sixth video, Tyler wasn't breathing evenly anymore. The sounds in the background, the laughter, the muffled music from the party, felt louder in his ears than the blood rushing through his head. And then the realization hit, heavier than anything else. This wasn't just someone's cruel prank. This was real. These were his friends. He looked over at Casey, still sleeping, one corner of her mouth turned up like she was dreaming something pleasant. He thought about all the nights he'd stayed in to study while she was out, trusting her without question. All the times he defended her when people made comments he didn't like. All the ways he'd tried to be the kind of boyfriend she could count on. His phone buzzed in his hand, snapping him out of it. A text from an unknown number. Rough night for you, huh? Another came seconds later, from a friend on his floor. Man, you seen this? Sorry, dude. He could feel it already, the shift. The way people would look at him from now on. The pity. The whispers. The smirks when they thought he wasn't looking. Casey stirred, blinking into the sunlight. Morning, she murmured, her voice scratchy. She reached for her phone without noticing his expression. Do you have something to tell me? Tyler's voice was low, almost calm. She frowned, scrolling through her notifications. About what? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned the phone toward her, the video playing without sound. Her eyes widened for a split second before she looked away, setting her phone down like it was suddenly too heavy. That's not, she started, then stopped, her tone flattening. Look, it was just stupid. I was drunk. I was bored. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? The calm was gone now, replaced by something sharp. Then my friends. All of them. In one night. She shrugged, as if the whole thing were an inconvenience. You've been so busy lately. It's like you don't even care what I do. I just needed some excitement. The casualness of it made his skin prickle. She wasn't crying. She wasn't apologizing. She was acting like he was overreacting. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? He asked, but she just rolled her eyes. Outside, the dorm was waking up, doors opening and closing, the echo of voices in the hallway, someone's music playing faintly down the corridor. Tyler could hear footsteps stop outside Casey's door, then move on. He wondered if they were already talking about him. Casey picked up her phone again, thumbs moving over the screen, not looking at him. He could see his own reflection in the darkened window. Pale, tense, something unfamiliar behind his eyes. The anger started in his chest, hot and fast, but it wasn't just anger. It was humiliation, betrayal, the sudden knowledge that he was the last to know about something everyone else had probably been laughing about since last night. She looked up at him finally, smirking faintly like she'd won some unspoken argument. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is." That was the moment the switch flipped. He stood, moving toward the tiny kitchenette. His hand found a knife block before his brain had fully caught up. The wood felt solid under his fingers, the handle fitting into his palm like it had always belonged there. Behind him, Casey was still talking, still minimizing, still dismissing him. The sound of her voice was suddenly unbearable. He turned back toward her, the knife at his side, his breath coming faster now. And for the first time since he'd opened his eyes that morning, Tyler knew exactly what he was going to do. The room felt smaller now, like the walls had moved in while they were talking. Casey was still sitting cross-legged on the bed, her phone in hand, half listening to him like she had a dozen other times when he'd tried to talk about their relationship. But this time, something was different. Tyler could feel it in the back of his neck, a tight, hot pressure that wouldn't let go. She glanced up at him, eyebrows raised, as if to say, "Well, are you going to stand there all day? Or are we done?" He didn't answer. His fingers curled tighter around the knife handle, the grain of the wood digging into his palm. He didn't even remember pulling it from the block. It had just happened. He took one step toward her, then another. "Tyler, what the hell?" Something inside him snapped. Not a crack, but a total collapse. The room seemed to tilt, the air thickening until each breath burned his lungs. Every laugh, every mocking glance from the videos replayed in his head all at once, a pounding chorus that drowned out reason. His fingers tightened on the knife, not out of choice, but because it felt like the only thing in the world that was solid. The first lunge was clumsy, almost hesitant, the blade grazing her side rather than going in deep. She gasped, eyes going wide, and scrambled back across the bed. Her phone clattered to the floor. "What is wrong with you?" she screamed, grabbing at the comforter like she could shield herself with it. But the sound of her voice, that same voice that had told him he was overreacting, that had mocked him without even raising its volume, only made the pressure in his head worse. He lunged again, this time with both hands on the knife. The blade went in just below her collarbone. Her scream turned into a choked gasp. She tried to shove him away, her nails raking down his forearm, but he barely felt it. He pulled the knife free and struck again. And again. By the third thrust, she was no longer screaming. By the fourth, she was slipping sideways off the bed, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Tyler followed her down, straddling her torso, the knife rising and falling in a frantic rhythm. The room was chaos. Sheets half off the bed, a lamp knocked over, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood. Somewhere, he was distantly aware of his own breathing, ragged and uneven, like he'd just sprinted across campus. Casey's hands weakened against his arms, her nails no longer digging in. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, her lips trying to form words that wouldn't come. A bubble of blood welled at the corner of her mouth, popping with her last shaky breath. Tyler froze, the knife still in his grip, the heat in his chest slowly giving way to a cold, hollow ache. He sat there for what felt like forever, staring down at her. There was no going back. The thing in front of him wasn't Casey anymore. Not the girl he'd met at the vending machine. Not the girl he'd kissed after graduation. It was just a body. He dropped the knife. The sound of it hitting the hardwood was louder than he expected. His own hand was slick, shaking. He wiped them on his jeans without thinking, leaving dark streaks across the denim. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed. Laughter echoed briefly, then faded. Tyler sat back against the bed frame, his mind blank. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another message, maybe another video. He didn't look. For a moment, he thought about running. He could take the back stairs, cut across the quad, be gone before anyone knew. But where would he go? What would he say when they found him? His eyes landed on the knife again, lying inches from her hand. He wondered if she'd touched it, if there'd be prints of hers mixed with his. None of it seemed to matter now. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The next thing he knew, the hallway was filled with voices, louder now, urgent. A heavy knock rattled the door, followed by a male voice calling his name. "Tyler? You in there?" He didn't answer. The knock came again, harder this time. Campus police. Open up. He stood slowly, his knees stiff, and walked to the door. When he opened it, the two officers on the other side took one look at him, the blood on his clothes, the vacant look in his eyes, and pushed past him. One went straight to Casey, kneeling to check for a pulse she didn't have. Tyler just stood there, watching. His ears rang, his vision narrowing to a tunnel. The officer who'd been checking Casey stood, her face tight, and signaled to her partner. Moments later, Tyler's wrists were pulled behind his back, cold metal closing around them. As they walked him down the hall, students' doors cracked open. Faces peered out, phones in hand, recording every second. He caught glimpses, wide eyes, whispers, someone mouthing, "Oh my God." By the time they reached the lobby, the flashing red and blue lights from the squad car painted the walls. Tyler didn't resist. He didn't speak. He just let them guide him outside, the morning air cool against the blood drying on his skin. Somewhere behind him, in that dorm room, the last traces of who they'd been together were still scattered. A half-empty cup on the desk, a blanket they'd shared, her phone face down on the floor. But none of it mattered now. Whatever they'd been, whatever they could have been, had ended the second he raised that knife. The interrogation room in the campus police substation was colder than Tyler expected. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the cinder block walls were painted the same off-white as every other institutional building on campus. He sat at the metal table, his wrists cuffed in front of him, dried blood flaking on his skin. He kept staring at a faint scratch on the tabletop, tracing it with his eyes, anything to avoid looking at the detectives who just walked in. Detective Laura Hanley was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a clipped tone that left no room for wasted words. Across from her was Detective Marcus Lee, younger but no less focused, flipping open a slim binder that already had Casey Morgan, homicide, typed across the front. They didn't start with questions. Hanley set a clear evidence bag on the table. Inside was the kitchen knife, the blade dark with dry blood. "We found this next to the victim," she said. "You want to tell us why your fingerprints are all over it?" Tyler swallowed, his throat dry. "Because I used it," he said, the words flat, almost too quiet to hear. Lee leaned forward. "Why? What happened in that room this morning?" Tyler's eyes flicked to the corner of the room where the camera's red light glowed. She wasn't who I thought she was." "Explain," Hanley said. Tyler recounted the anonymous email and the explicit videos showing Casey with his 6 closest friends, and how, in minutes, humiliation turned into something darker. Hanley didn't interrupt, but Lee took notes, his pen scratching quickly. "Tyler," Hanley said after a pause, "being humiliated doesn't give you the right to take someone's life. You understand that, right?" His jaw tightened. "You didn't see her face when I showed her. She didn't care. She laughed." Hanley exchanged a look with Lee. Not sympathy, but recognition. They'd both heard variations of this before. Meanwhile, the crime scene unit was working 3 floors up in Casey's room. Technicians in gloves moved methodically, photographing the bed, the blood spatter on the wall, the overturned lamp. They collected her phone from the floor, its screen cracked, and bagged it for digital analysis. One tech picked up a second phone from the desk, Tyler's, which was already buzzing with incoming messages. Across the hall, uniformed officers were knocking on doors, taking initial statements. Students were jittery, some still hung over, others already rehearsing the version of events they'd tell later. Jenna, Casey's roommate, was pale and shaking when she let them in. "I didn't hear anything until it was over," she said, eyes darting toward the window. "We were at the party together, but she left with Brandon first, I think. Or maybe Kyle. I don't know. It was a lot." When pressed, she admitted she'd seen Casey with multiple guys that night. Flirty, drunk, you know how she gets. She didn't seem surprised by the videos. In fact, she confirmed that a group chat with nearly 24 members had been sharing them since around 1 a.m. By mid-morning, all 6 of the men in those videos were brought in for questioning. Brandon leaned back in his chair like he was in a job interview he didn't care about. "She came on to me," he said, smirking. "We were all just having fun. I didn't know it was going to turn into some big drama." Kyle was more defensive. "Look, I didn't know she was going to go with everyone. I thought it was just whatever. One-time thing. I didn't think Tyler would find out." Ethan kept his answers short, eyes on the table. Marcus tried to joke his way through it until he cut him off. Trevor said almost nothing, and Shane admitted flatly that he'd filmed at least one of the encounters because it was wild and sent it to a friend who must have passed it around. What none of them denied was that it had happened. What they argued about was whether Casey had planned it or if it just evolved during the night. None of them seemed to grasp the gravity of what came after. Back in the evidence lab, digital forensics began extracting data from both Casey's and Tyler's phones. The group chat was a goldmine. Timestamps showing the videos had been shared while Tyler was still downstairs at the party, multiple comments mocking him by name, and memes created in real time. There were also texts from Casey to Jenna and another friend sent less than an hour before her death. He's going to freak when he finds out. But maybe this will wake him up. When Hanley confronted Tyler with those texts, his expression barely changed. So, I was supposed to be a joke? Something to wake up? His voice was calm, but his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. The medical examiner's report came in that afternoon. Casey had sustained 7 stab wounds, 4 to the chest, 2 to the neck, 1 to the abdomen, along with defensive wounds on her arms and hands. The cause of death was massive blood loss. The report also noted that the angle and force of the wounds were consistent with an attack in close quarters, with the assailant straddling the victim. By the second day, the case was airtight. They had the weapon, the confession, the eyewitness statement from students who'd heard shouting in Casey's room just before the attack. And they had the motive, if not legally justifiable, at least understandable to a jury in the way crimes of passion sometimes are. When the campus newspaper broke the story online, the comments section exploded. Some called Tyler a monster. Others called him a victim who'd been pushed past his breaking point. Screenshots of the videos were circulating on Twitter within hours, blurred but still recognizable to anyone who knew them. Tyler's parents drove in from Fairview that night. His mother cried through the entire visit, pressing her hand against the glass in the holding cell. His father stood behind her, jaw tight, saying nothing. Meanwhile, Casey's family arrived to collect her belongings. Her mother broke down when they showed her the phone, refusing to look at the videos. That's not who she was, she said. She was a good girl. She just made mistakes. Hanley knew the trial would be brutal. Not because the facts were in dispute, but because the defense would lean hard on humiliation as provocation, trying to downgrade the charge from murder to manslaughter. The prosecution would counter that Tyler had time to think, to walk away, and instead chose to get the knife. By the end of that week, the university had issued statements condemning both the violence and the culture of degradation that allowed the videos to be shared in the first place. Jefferson Hall was under lockdown for days while students and staff were interviewed. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Tyler sat in a cell, staring at the wall, replaying those videos over and over in his mind. Not the grainy footage itself, but the moment he realized the girl he'd loved since high school had turned him into a punchline. The trial of Tyler Mason began on a cold Monday morning in early March, 5 months after Casey Morgan's death. By then, the story had gone national. True crime podcasts had dissected every rumor. Morning shows had run split-screen images of Tyler's clean-cut senior yearbook photo beside his orange jumpsuit mugshot, and the videos of Casey with the 6 men, blurred but unmistakable, had been replayed endlessly on cable news. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the curb, their satellite dishes jutting into the gray sky. Protesters held signs on both sides of the argument. Justice for Casey on one end, he snapped on the other. College students from State University came in groups, wearing hoodies emblazoned with either Casey's initials or Tyler's name. The public gallery filled before the jury had even been sworn in. Inside, the air was heavy. Tyler sat at the defense table, dressed in a navy suit borrowed from his older brother, hair trimmed neatly, hands folded in front of him. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. His attorney, Frank Delaney, was a seasoned public defender with a gift for making juries lean in. Across the aisle, Assistant District Attorney Marissa Holt organized her files with the calm precision of someone who knew she had the stronger case. The prosecution opened first. Holt stood, facing the jury, and began with the simplest fact. On the morning of October 15th, 18-year-old Tyler Mason stabbed Casey Morgan 7 times, killing her in her dorm room. The evidence is clear, the witnesses are credible, and the defendant himself admits he did it. This case is not about who committed the murder. It is about why, and whether humiliation can ever be an excuse for ending someone's life. She laid out the timeline: the party, the videos, the group chat, the morning confrontation, the knife. She promised the jury they'd see the messages Casey sent to friends, hear from the medical examiner, and watch the interviews where Tyler confessed. Delaney's opening took a different tone. He didn't deny the act, but he painted Tyler as a quiet, loyal young man pushed past the brink. "My client walked into college believing he'd found the love of his life," he said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of heat. In a matter of minutes, he learned that the woman he trusted had betrayed him with not 1, not 2, but 6 of his closest friends in the same night, and that the entire campus was laughing at him. This is not premeditation. This is a crime of passion, born in a storm of rage and shame that would have shattered any reasonable person. The first witnesses were the campus police officers who responded that morning. Officer Dana Whitmore described finding Tyler on the floor, cross-legged, the knife still in his hand. "He didn't resist," she said. "He just looked empty." The prosecution displayed photos from the scene: the bed, the overturned lamp, the blood on the carpet. Several jurors shifted in their seats. Next came Jenna, Casey's roommate. She testified that she'd seen Casey with multiple men at the party and that Casey knew about the videos being shared before her death. She said he'd freak out, Jenna admitted, her voice shaking. She thought it would wake him up. I guess she thought it was a joke. Then came the 6 men themselves. Brandon was defensive. Kyle looked ashamed. Ethan avoided eye contact. Marcus fidgeted, Trevor mumbled, and Shane smirked like he still didn't understand why he was there. Each confirmed being with Casey that night. Under Holt's questioning, they all acknowledged that Tyler didn't know about it until the videos surfaced. Under Delaney's cross-examination, they were pressed about the group chat mocking Tyler, the captions, the timing of the videos. Shane admitted he sent one to a friend, knowing it would spread. The medical examiner's testimony was clinical, outlining each wound, the defensive injuries on Casey's arms, and the rapid blood loss. When Holt displayed the autopsy diagrams, Tyler kept his eyes on the table. Delaney's defense hinged on provocation. He called Tyler's parents, who described him as gentle, patient, and never violent. They spoke about his first love with Casey, the way he'd light up when talking about her. Friends from high school echoed that image. Then Tyler took the stand. The courtroom hushed. He spoke softly at first, explaining how they met, how much he'd trusted her, how blindsided he felt that morning. It wasn't just that she cheated, he said, his voice breaking slightly. It was how she did it, who she did it with. And then she looked at me like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. Holt's cross-examination was relentless. "Mr. Mason, you had options. You could have walked away. You could have called a friend, left the room, gone anywhere else. Instead, you went to the kitchenette, got a knife, and came back. That's a choice. That's intent." Tyler shook his head. It didn't feel like a choice. It felt like something broke. "I wasn't thinking." The jury watched him closely, some with skepticism, others with something closer to pity. Closing arguments were a clash of narratives. Holt told them this was a textbook case of domestic homicide, a man controlling the outcome when his partner did something he didn't like. "If humiliation becomes an excuse for murder," she warned, "we are all less safe." Delaney countered that Tyler's actions, while tragic and wrong, were the explosion of a bomb someone else lit. He asked them to consider the human reality of betrayal, the intensity of that morning, the way a young man's world can collapse in seconds. He urged them to see manslaughter, not murder. When the jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom exhaled. It took them less than 5 hours to return. The foreperson stood, hands trembling slightly, and read the verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Tyler didn't flinch. Behind him, his mother sobbed quietly into her husband's shoulder. On the other side of the aisle, Casey's family held each other, eyes closed. The judge thanked the jury and set sentencing for the following month. As the bailiffs led Tyler away, cameras outside were already broadcasting the breaking news. The arguments about justice, betrayal, and blame would rage on for weeks. But inside that courtroom, it was over. Sentencing day drew a smaller crowd than the trial, but the tension in the courtroom was even thicker. There were fewer protesters outside now. The frenzy had cooled, yet the case still carried the kind of notoriety that made strangers stop and watch when the news covered it. Tyler Mason entered in his orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled, hair slightly longer than during the trial. His face was pale, expression unreadable, like he'd already prepared himself for whatever was coming. Judge Robert Keaton, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for being tough on violent crime, reviewed the jury's verdict before turning his attention to the sentencing guidelines. Second-degree murder in the state carried a potential term of 15 years to life. Both sides had filed motions arguing for the extreme ends of that range. Assistant District Attorney Marissa Holt spoke first, her voice steady and unyielding. She reminded the court of the brutality of the attack: 7 stab wounds, multiple defensive injuries, and the fact that Tyler had the chance to walk away, but didn't. This was not a split-second accident, she said. It was an intentional act of lethal violence, carried out on a young woman who had the right to live, regardless of her choices. The state recommends a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for at least 25 years. Frank Delaney, Tyler's defense attorney, took a different approach. He acknowledged the loss of Casey Morgan's life and the pain her family carried, but urged the judge to consider Tyler's age, lack of criminal history, and the extraordinary emotional provocation that led to the killing. Tyler is not a career criminal, Delaney argued. He is a young man who, in the worst moment of his life, made an irreversible mistake. We ask for the possibility of parole after 15 years, so that he may one day rebuild a life outside these walls. Then it was time for victim impact statements. Casey's mother stepped to the podium, her hands trembling as she unfolded a piece of paper. Her voice cracked as she described the phone call, telling her Casey was gone, how she still expected to see her walk through the front door. "I know my daughter wasn't perfect," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But she was mine. She was breathing, laughing, dreaming. And he took that away." Her father's voice was harder, full of anger that had not cooled. "He didn't just kill her," he said, glaring at Tyler. "He destroyed every holiday, every birthday, every plan we had for the rest of her life. He should never see the outside of a prison again." When the judge invited Tyler to speak, he stood slowly. His voice was low, uneven. "I can't undo what I did. I can't bring Casey back. I wish I'd walked out of that room. I wish I'd been stronger. I know saying sorry means nothing to you, but I am sorry. To her family, to my family. I'm sorry." He sat back down without looking at anyone. Judge Keaton took a long pause before delivering the sentence. "Mr. Mason, you were 18 years old when you took another person's life. You had opportunities to remove yourself from that situation. Instead, you made the choice to take up a weapon and use it in a violent and deliberate way. The law cannot turn back time, but it can ensure there is accountability." He sentenced Tyler Mason to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. A murmur ran through the courtroom, some thinking it too harsh, others too lenient. Casey's mother wept quietly into her husband's chest. Tyler's mother closed her eyes, clutching a tissue so tightly it tore in her hand. In the weeks that followed, the consequences rippled outward. The 6 men in the videos faced no criminal charges, but the fallout was brutal. All were suspended from State University for conduct violations. 3 transferred to other schools under assumed names, while the others dropped out entirely. The fallout followed them beyond campus. Brandon lost his part-time job at a local bar after customers recognized him from the leaked clips. Kyle's scholarship was revoked. Shane returned to his hometown only to find cheaters spray-painted across his car. Even years later, their names would resurface in online threads, the scandal shadowing every job interview and new relationship. They became pariahs online, their faces appearing on memes and hate posts that followed them long after the scandal faded from headlines. The university launched mandatory consent and respect training for all incoming students, along with new policies on digital harassment. They also quietly settled with Casey's family over claims that the school failed to address the toxic culture in the dorms. For Tyler's family, the shame was suffocating. His parents stopped attending church after whispers in the pews became too much. His older brothers avoided public events. They visited him in prison every few months, but the trips were strained, filled with long silences and awkward small talk. Casey's funeral had been months earlier, but the graveyard still saw fresh flowers each week. Friends left photos, letters, even small bottles of her favorite perfume. Some left notes of anger at Tyler. Others left confessions of their own regrets. In prison, Tyler kept to himself. He worked in a library, avoided fights, and rarely spoke about his case. Other inmates knew who he was, the college kid who killed his cheating girlfriend, and that reputation kept most at a distance. The story lived on in a strange way. True crime shows produced slick reenactments. Talk shows debated whether betrayal should ever factor into sentencing, and social media argued endlessly about who was the real villain. For some, Tyler was a cautionary tale about letting rage control you. For others, Casey was a warning about the risks of public humiliation in the digital age. But for the people who had actually lived it, the families, the friends, the students who'd been in Jefferson Hall that night, it wasn't a debate. It was a permanent wound. And no sentence, no reform, no headline could make it hurt less. In the months and years after the verdict, the Mason Morgan case became more than a headline. It became a cultural flashpoint. Professors at State University used it in criminology lectures, citing it as a textbook example of a crime of passion colliding with the modern reality of digital humiliation. Law students debated whether Tyler's sentence was fair, while sociology classes examined the social dynamics that had led up to that night: betrayal, peer pressure, toxic dorm culture, and the viral spread of private moments. For the students who lived in Jefferson Hall during that fall semester, the case never really left them. Some transferred to other schools, unable to walk past the third-floor hallway without remembering the police tape and flashing lights. Others stayed, but spoke about it in hushed tones, as if saying Casey's name out loud might bring back the chaos of that weekend. The university eventually remodeled the dorm, repainting walls, replacing carpet, and renumbering rooms, but no amount of cosmetic change erased the memory. Online, the story took on a life of its own. YouTube videos with titles like "The Party That Ended in Murder" and "She Slept with 6 Guys" and "Paid the Ultimate Price" racked up millions of views. True crime podcasts dissected the case episode by episode, and Reddit threads argued endlessly over who bore the most responsibility. Some commenters vilified Tyler, calling him a violent misogynist. Others saw him as a naive kid who'd been humiliated past his breaking point. Casey, too, became a polarizing figure. To some, a victim whose private life shouldn't have cost her life. To others, the architect of her own destruction. The ripple effects reached further than either family could have imagined. State legislators in 2 different states cited the case, while introducing bills aimed at strengthening revenge porn laws and criminalizing the non-consensual sharing of intimate videos. Advocacy groups pointed out that while Tyler was rightly punished for murder, the digital abuse he suffered had no real legal consequences for the people who started it. Casey's parents created the Morgan Foundation for Digital Respect, a nonprofit focused on educating teenagers and college students about consent, online privacy, and the dangers of humiliation-based harassment. They toured campuses, speaking to rooms full of students who shifted uncomfortably in their seats, aware that the same scenario could play out anywhere. Tyler's family stayed quiet publicly, but in a rare letter to a local paper, his mother wrote about the danger of bottling up emotions and the need for young men to have safe outlets for anger before it turns into violence. "We lost 2 lives that day," she wrote. "One to the grave and one to a cell. Both could have been saved if someone had stopped the spiral sooner." Inside prison, Tyler's name slowly faded from headlines, but his case was still whispered about among inmates, passed along as a cautionary tale. not about betrayal, but about how fast a single moment can erase your entire future. He declined all interview requests, telling his attorney he didn't want to feed the media machine that had turned his life into content. By the 5-year anniversary, the media attention had dulled, but the story still lingered like a scar, sometimes hidden, sometimes visible in conversations about digital ethics or campus safety. Jefferson Hall's third floor had new residents who didn't know the history, but older students still avoided the room where Casey died, leaving it empty more semesters than not. In the end, the legacy of the Mason Morgan case wasn't just about a murder. It was about how betrayal, humiliation, and rage can collide in the digital age, and how the consequences don't just end with a guilty verdict. They echo, reshaping the lives of everyone even remotely connected, long after the cameras are gone.